What's up YouTube, Magnus here, back with another video for you guys. Today we're making some Demi Gauntlets, which is like a half gauntlet for sport fighters. So let's have a look. Before we take a look, remember that you can find the patterns and artwork for all my projects on my website and my Etsy, link in the description down below. You can also find the same patterns and artwork month to month on my Patreon account, so have a look at that. Also, if you're anything like me and are one of the 5% of the population that wear t-shirts, I've been designing shirts for a while now. They're on my Teespring, there's links below this video, be sure to check them out. I'm wearing one of them now. You can see that, I guess I could just lower the camera. This video is brought to you by LONSDALE Leather. Be sure to check out their website in the description of this video for links to tools, leather, and supplies. The pattern is pretty straightforward. Just pick it up off of my Etsy shop or website and get to cutting it out. People have a variety of punches, so these hole placements are a guideline. Use your best judgment. I usually do the first and last hole on the pattern, mark them on my leather, and then punch up to those holes. This is a 11.5 ounce, a touch light. 12 ounces is usually my minimum for Demi Gauntlets, but this actually turned out pretty good. Now, just because you've made a small, medium, or large size Demi Gauntlet does not mean that all Demi Gauntlets are created equal. It does not necessarily mean that this Demi Gauntlet will fit nicely into the basket hilt of whatever sword you are using to protect your hand properly or to not interfere with your hand. So this pattern is cut long. You'll probably have to trim it down a little bit to make sure that it's perfectly fit to your basket. And again, that's really dependent upon your basket hilt, the size of it, etc., etc. So feel free to adjust and tweak accordingly. Just because you've got brand new blades doesn't mean they're as sharp as they can be. Be sure to use a strop and jeweler's rouge to get your blades razor sharp, especially on this heavy leather. Because I'm using heavier leather here, I'm using a larger beveler, a size 3. That'll give me more of a bevel and allow me to burnish my edges a lot easier. You can see that I didn't bevel along where the two pieces are going to join, the hand piece and wrist piece, because I want those to butt up nicely. I'm putting the stitch groove in so I can align my holes nicely. Now I left this in here, I was on a roll and just wasn't thinking. You can see where I've suddenly figured out I made a mistake. There doesn't need to be any holes there. So this is where the holes should start and move along through the middle portion of the wrist part of the Demi. And because I've screwed up and put those other holes in there, instead of throwing out the piece, I'm going to show you guys how I would fix that piece without having to throw away the work I've already done. So because I've added these extra holes that don't need to be there, I might as well put holes all the way along the edge. And then my plan to cover up the mistake is just to fill those holes with stitches. So you'll see what happens to that a little later once we get to that point. Though obviously you won't be making this mistake because you've seen me do it. Oh, magic. I love magic tricks. Now I'm just wetting the leather so I can carve it. I have lots of videos on carving, feel free to check those out. Fairly simple knot. Obviously this is included in the pattern on my Etsy and website. Don't worry too much if you have a poor transfer, if your lines are a little wiggly. When you swivel knife, it'll all hide itself with the bevels and the knife cuts. Just don't push too hard. You just need to have a little bit of an outline. Polish up your blade and get ready for your cuts. Leather carving takes a lot of patience, but it's pretty rewarding, so just take your time. Make sure you're not doing it on super soggy leather. Wet the leather and let it dry a bit. LONSDALE Leather carries these cool Angelus dye pens. You just take the inside out of the pen and then you soak dye up with it and put it back in the pen, and it allows you a lot more fine control than a brush. So you can speed through stuff without worrying too much about it getting all over the place. I haven't used them a ton, but they're pretty cool, especially for a project like this where I just want to darken the top of the knotwork really quick and not worry about it too much. Now we're just smoothing out the edges, which is important on Demi Gauntlets more than other pieces of armor because the chance of rubbing against your hand is there, and you want to make sure you don't have an abrasive, wax-hardened surface to rip your skin open. And if I'm feeling super specific about a piece, I'll even sand the burnished edge after it's waxed and cooled. And I'll do it on this project, you'll see what I mean. And here's where I start with the fake stitches that really don't do anything in order to cover up my mistake. If you're not waxing your armor and just doing this for costume, I think this kind of color combination looks pretty cool. But after I wax this piece, you'll see how much it darkens and you kind of lose some of that cool contrast that we've got going on right now. So obviously stitching ponies are great, but not necessary or mandatory for this project. They're especially great for making sure I can actually film myself stitching it without going insane. So don't stress about the stitching pony too much. If you're doing other projects, sure, I didn't buy a stitching pony for 15 years. Like, I think I got my stitching pony last year literally because I was shooting video. So don't sweat it, but they are kind of handy if you can pick one up or just make one yourself, I guess. I like to get my wax up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. 125 degrees Celsius. Make sure you get your leather completely submerged in wax, because if you leave it half submerged and cook it, you're going to get a big cook line across it. So roll it around a few times if it's sticking out of the wax. And this crockpot that I've got that's listed on my Amazon storefront is awesome. I know what you're thinking, Magnus, they didn't possibly use wax to harden leather armor in the Middle Ages, Viking Age, Medieval Age, whatever ages. I'm not up to date on my ages very much. That's absolutely correct. Really, I don't care. If there's any kind of shaping you want to do to this piece, now's the time to do it while it's still malleable, because while it's hot, obviously it's still flexible. As it cools, it's going to harden up. Here it is all hardened up. I'm going to use this very flexible sponge sander, and the sanding sponge, I'll just run all the way around on all the edges and make them nice and smooth. It's an extra step, not totally necessary. I didn't bevel and burnish this spot because I didn't want it to overlap into where I'm joining the wrist and back of the hand part, so I just rub it down a bit so it doesn't have a sharp, crisp cut edge. I'm using some super thin foam. If you have a foam shop near where you live, you can get skins, which are the very top layer of a foam set. So you can get a really thin skin and you can like glue it onto pieces like this Demi Gauntlet. I'm using barge cement here. Don't use barge cement, just use some Super 77 spray, which I usually say don't use, but it works incredibly well on foam and it'll glue nicely to the Demi. Barge just dries awkwardly when it's against something that's waxed, and it even dries awkwardly against foam for some reason. The foam isn't necessarily mandatory, but once you wax harden leather armor, all the little bits on the back become like sandpaper. So if you're fighting with it and you have a bare hand and you're decided to just stick your hand into the Demi Gauntlet, unless you sanded the hell out of the back or got really lucky with the grain, and no, even then, make sure that you, at the very minimum, glue another piece of leather down, a super thin piece of leather, and trim it. Or you can put foam if you want, or you can wear a glove. The choice is yours. So as you can see here, everything seems to be fitting pretty good. It's a little long at the knuckles, as expected. I would trim it evenly past the knuckles. So obviously it's a little too long at the pinky. Well, that's okay. We can deal with that. Well, that's about it, everybody. Another video in the books. Make sure you hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for future videos. Hit that notification button so you don't miss any of my content. And until next time, keep on being creative in whatever it is you do.